There's a report that's doing the rounds at the moment about a young woman in Iran who has done one of the bravest things I've ever seen. She has stripped in public. Now, by stripping, we don't mean she's absolutely naked. She's in her underwear. But, in any other part of the world, or at least in the Western world, that would just be seen as exhibitionism. But in the context of Iran, that is extremely brave because she knows full well the risks that are involved. I'm going to read out the report from The Guardian. Like I say, this has been reported in numerous sources, but I just have nothing but respect for the courage that that takes. But it shouldn't have to be that way. It shouldn't have to take that sort of act of defiance against this ghastly regime. So I'm going to read out the piece. If you just bear with me, it's got some of the important details about this case. The report is by Ashifa Kazam and the agencies. Not quite sure what and the agencies means. I guess that is her contacts in Iran. I'm not entirely sure. Anyway, this is the report. Iran arrests woman who stripped in protest at abusive dress code policing. Amnesty International calls on authorities to release student who reportedly had a violent confrontation with Basij paramilitaries. Amnesty International has called on authorities in Iran to immediately and unconditionally release a female student who was arrested after stripping to her underwear in what the organisation described as a public protest against harassment relating to the country's strict dress code. The incident took place after the woman, who has not been identified, reportedly had a confrontation with members of the Basij paramilitary force, who ripped her headscarf and tore her clothes inside Tehran's prestigious Islamic Assad University. Videos posted to social media appear to show the woman removing her clothes and walking out onto the street in her underwear. A second video appears to show the woman being bundled into a car by men in plain clothes. The student media outlet Amir Kabir newsletter said the woman had been harassed by a Basij member for not wearing a headscarf. Under Iran's mandatory dress code, women must wear a headscarf and loose-fitting clothes in public. The media outlet also alleged that she was beaten during the arrest, and on Saturday said that information about the woman's condition and whereabouts was unavailable. Amnesty International Iran called for an independent and impartial investigation into the allegations of abuse. Iran's authorities must immediately and unconditionally release the university student who was violently arrested after she removed her clothes in protests against abusive enforcement of compulsory veiling by security officials, it said on social media. Pending her release, authorities must protect her from torture and other ill treatment and ensure access to family and lawyer. Iran's that's and lawyer. I think that should be and a lawyer. Iran's conservative Fars news agency confirmed the incident, saying that the student had worn inappropriate clothes and had stripped after being told by security guards to comply with the dress code. In a report that cited witnesses, it said that security guards had spoken calmly with the student and denied reports that the actions had been aggressive in any way. I don't believe that for a second. The incident comes more than 2 years after Iran was rocked by nationwide protests after the theft in custody of Mahsa Amini, an Iranian Kurdish woman who had been arrested for an alleged breach of the dress code. The protests, during which some women defied authorities to cast off their headscarves, were later violently curbed by authorities, and at least 500 people were killed in those protests. Incidentally, there were decent, brave men who joined women in those protests and also died, and that shouldn't be forgotten. But there is no question about it, Iran's Islamist regime is deeply, deeply, deeply misogynistic. And I have to say, I find it a little bit galling when hijabis in the West, such as the Olympian this year, the Dutch hijabi Olympian who won, I believe it was the women's 1,000 meters in Paris, she made that little protest, donning her headscarf and on the podium to defy France's laws on that issue. There's simply no rational comparison between the fate of women in Iran versus the situation of Muslim women in France. There just isn't. It's such comparisons are odious. A Muslim woman in France may get a fine, but she is not going to be dragged off to a brutal prison and beaten. It just isn't going to happen. There's no comparison. So it angers me that Western hijabis, try to portray a country like France as as oppressive as Iran. That's grotesque. It also makes a mockery of the free choice argument. I say to Western hijabi women, um, you say it's a free choice. Are you going to publicly condemn the way your sisters are treated in Iran? And if you're not going to condemn that, how can you honestly talk about free choice? How can you talk about the hijab being a free choice when you have an Islamic majority country that is forcefully imposing it? And Iran is a glaring example, but it's not the only example. Since the Taliban returned to power in Afghanistan, the situation's only gotten worse. Women are now forbidden from speaking in public. Fact of the matter is, Islamic theocracies have an absolutely brutal track record on women's rights. They have a brutal track record on human rights in general, including against men, but particularly against women's rights. This is a fact. This is an empirical reality. Um, And the only thing I can consider with this case is this young woman knows the system she's under. She must know that there's very real risks involved. She knows she faces torture in prison. It doesn't matter what the authorities say, they're lying through their teeth. Because we saw what happened 2 years ago. Hundreds of people gunned down on the streets, many more beaten and tortured. It's the Iranian human rights record is absolutely one of the worst on earth. Um, and there's no signs it's getting better. So I don't think that the Iranian government's going to care what Amnesty International says, although I think that Amnesty's right to call this out. But it's very difficult to know what's the right approach to this because, of course, there can be Western condemnation, and there's already Western sanctions on Iran for other reasons. Um, I certainly think that we should be selective in terms of asylum. So, for example, I would be very sympathetic to giving asylum to Iranian women and Iranian Christians. Um, we need vetting on asylum cases. I think anyone who holds misogynistic views should be barred, for example, from coming in. And that itself is a very complex issue. There's no magic wand to fix that. But I'll say something else. I sometimes see these videos, Western travelers, and they think they're so enlightened and they're so open-minded. And there'll be videos like the Iran the media doesn't want you to see, and it'll show friendly people and interesting cultural sites, and it'll be all positive. I say those people are shamefully engaging in propaganda because you could go to any country and ostensibly find some good things. I dare say you could even go to North Korea and find some friendly people. But I think those sort of videos, and unfortunately they get a lot of traction. They're clickbait. Some of them have millions of views. But this is the real face of Iran, or at least it is a face that should not be hidden. Just because you are a Western man and you've had a good experience in Iran does not mean that these things aren't happening. That's not it pisses me right off, to be quite honest, because it's absolute propaganda. The media reporting stuff like this, it's absolutely valid and it's essential. If this young woman has the courage to do this, the least that can be done is it be reported to shame the Iranian authorities. Now, are they going to release her? Um, they might, but not before probably beating her and psychologically torturing her. I do not believe for a second, given their track record, that they're just going to give her a ticket. This is an extremely misogynistic regime. But it also reiterates that wherever you have Islamic theocracy, women's rights are threatened. I would also say this. Yes, there's an extreme patriarchy in Iran, but there are some young Iranian men who know there is a problem and they stand with their Iranian sisters. So it wouldn't be fair to say it's all Iranian men. There's also some older Iranian women who embolden this sexist regime. There'll be older Iranian hijabis who totally approve of what the Basij thugs are doing. Because if every single woman in Iran defied this, it would probably collapse. So it's a little bit more complicated than men versus women. Absolutely, Iran is an extreme example of patriarchy, but every few years there are protests in Iran. There is signs that it's been escalating recently. I mean, it used to be since the Islamic Revolution in 1979, there was roughly one big uprising per decade. 1989, 2009, um, 2019. But we've also seen in recent years it's been more often now. And I guess what young Iranians are considering is that they've nothing to lose because they know the regime is brutal. They know that there's a chance they could be shot dead in the street or beaten or tortured. So it's almost like an extreme courage that is taken. I just think that someone like her deserves a lot more attention than Western hijabis who whine about France's headscarf ban. There is just no comparison between the situation of Muslim women in Western Europe and all women in Iran. There's no comparison. I'm not saying that there may be individual examples of hate crimes, but the difference is there's laws against that. So if a Muslim woman in the West, for example, has her headscarf ripped off by some bigots, they're going to be arrested and that will be taken seriously. In Iran, it's a revolutionary act simply to remove a headscarf. And what she has done is gone even further and stripped down to her underwear. It's an extreme act of defiance, but an extremely brave act of defiance. And I've got nothing but respect for her. Um, she absolutely puts to shame these cowardly men, these Basij thugs who are propping up a ghastly regime. One day this regime will fall because no dictatorship lasts forever. And when it does, that will be a wonderful day.